Hello my friends, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, my name is Alexandra. I'm a professional fashion designer, pattern cutter and creative consultant. Yada 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 yada. Oh, I need to breathe. That's a very long introduction, isn't it? Anyway, feeling quite clinical today. I'm in a white jumper, I've got white walls, it's quite bright outside, really enjoying and not complaining about this late October sunshine. But yeah, forgive me if this looks a little bit medical. Also, for anybody, I always get, like, not criticism, but comments that are like, why as a creative is your studio so bland? That's because I work on so many different projects that if I had it a certain style or aesthetic, I think it would blur my mind. Anyway, today, I don't know if I'm going to make this a one-part or two-part video, but over in the DPL Atelier, which is my fashion membership, we are in cut month of my Create, Cut, Construct framework cycle, where my members and I design, draft, and sew our very own unique ideas and add them to our wardrobe in a sustainable way. So month one is Create, we design, we do fashion design skills. Month two is pattern cutting, where we draft things to our measurements. And month three is Construct, which, lo and behold, is sewing at the machine or by hand. And this month in November at the moment is cut month. We are designing, drafting and making our very own jumper ideas. So to celebrate, I have been doing a few pattern cutting focused videos for you guys so that you can at least come along with a little bit of the journey if you feel like a membership might not be for you. I'm here to serve, you know that. I thought that we could go over some pattern cutting 101 basics, from adding seam allowance, squaring off, what does squaring off even mean, from truing your seams, from walking your pattern, all of these kind of foundational skills that I wouldn't necessarily think to cover. I think when you've been, I've been in the industry now for over a decade. I've not done anything else. This has literally just been my career. And I think when you have been going at it for so long, you almost forget, not where you started, I sound like I'm freaking Queen of Sheba, but you forget how far you've come and the kind of basic foundational skills that are needed. So like, I'm jumping in the deep end teaching you how to draft kimono sleeves. If you haven't seen that video already, go and give it a watch. And I think I've just needed to touch base and be like, let's revisit the basics. It's good for me to go over. It's going to be great for my members. I'll add this in the membership as well. And then of course, my friends, you on YouTube, I'm going to be giving you some high value skills today. So I'll catch you over at the cutting table. We're going to be using a Pattern Master today. It is a very nifty transferable skills tool. You can do everything with the Pattern Master. And again, I have filmed a video on that in this YouTube universe. So go and have a look and subscribe while you're there. Now I really am plugging my thing, aren't I? Go and have a look at that video. I've got so many high value videos for you to enjoy at your leisure. And then we'll be jumping in today to these easy to follow skills that will absolutely up level your sewing project. So let's go. Before we jump in then, there's a few basic tools I'll be using. And again, if you want any elaboration on these, then by all means sign up for my free Pattern Cutting Basics course, which teaches you over 3 easy to follow beginner friendly lessons. So I'm going to be using a women's wear block. This is from my very own pattern library. Inside the DPL Atelier, I teach you how to draft one of these to your measurements. I've also got a Pattern Master. I feel like I need to be like, holy grail of my pattern cutting toolkit. Masking tape, paper scissors, not fabric scissors. I don't need to explain this to you guys. I'm sure many partners and children and husbands out there know the importance and have felt your wrath if they've ever borrowed the wrong pair of scissors. A tracing wheel. This makes small indentations along the page so that we can trace off our patterns with accuracy. A mechanical pencil, or a pencil with a very, very sharp nib. If I roll that up and down, you can see how sharp and accurate that is for millimeter precision. And pattern cutting paper. So to get started then, I'm just going to trace around my block, get it onto my pattern paper, and then I will be removing the block and just working with the paper pattern piece itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to square off from my centre front line, and I'm going to transfer my horizontal balance lines on. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by horizontal balance line, go and watch my most recent video before this one, where I help you professionally label and mark your sewing patterns. But the first skill that is really important for drafting your own patterns is the ability to square off. Now down here, you're going to notice that I have put my pattern master at a 90-degree angle to the center front line. Squaring off is so important for not only precision and accuracy, but for maintaining the balance of your pattern and having consistency with your grain lines. Cutting your pattern on the wrong grain line can be detrimental to the end result and fit of your garment. And so squaring off is essentially making sure, whether that is squaring off horizontally, squaring off vertically, that you are aligning your pattern master to whatever line you're squaring off from. Again, I could square off from this line by lining my pattern master to it like this and drawing horizontally down for a straight grain, or I can square off from my center front line as I've done here, and I can square off, which would end up being a horizontal balance line or the cross grain. And so squaring off is integral. And so again, when you come to square off necklines, unless you're doing something like a V-neck, because don't forget, we are working with half a front bodice here. So should I end up doing a V-neck, that would come down something like this. But where it hits this center front line here, when you cut that out and mirror it, this will end up coming back up as a V point here. So unless you square off, that is going to ensure that when you cut this on the fold, it has a seamless transition. So areas where I'd be squaring off, beyond drafting my own patterns, you may want to square off at your armhole. So where this armhole meets the back pattern armhole, you might want that to be flush. This is dependent on how your armhole is drafted. You might want to square off at the shoulder. Even if that is 1/2 centimetre, it just ensures that that line, so say the start of the armhole here, even if that is 2 millimeters, as small as that, you would just want to make sure that that runs flush onto the next pattern piece. So squaring off and understanding how to square off is really, really important, and a pattern master with all of the rulers and guides is really easy and helps you with this. Next up, I want to show you the importance of walking your pattern. Now, if I did this with full scale, this is the back bodice block. So this is my front bodice block. Now, a bodice block is a foundational shape. This is the most simplest you could possibly get. It will literally just fit the body with a normal, almost scoop crew neckline. There's no design details on this, but it has been drafted to fit measurements. And once you've got a block in place, once you've got the foundations in place, you can then hack this into more elaborate designs. And again, I teach you how to do that inside the DPL Atelier. But this is a basic women's wear bodice block, drafted to my personal sample size measurements, intended to have a sleeve as well. Sleeveless garments will have a different armhole. But what I want you to consider is walking the pattern. Now, walking the pattern is where we cross-reference the measurements. So if I took my bodice block here and started at the underarm point, I'm going to just hold that down and pivot until the edge of my pattern breaks away from the line of my other pattern. So you can see I'm going to slowly pivot this around. And what this will help you do is ensure that all of your seam lines align. And so you can see that that goes down to the edge there. But it wasn't just a case of placing that. You want to make sure that you are walking your pattern, and this can be seen even more so when you come to walk sleeve patterns. Now, if I do this with quarter scale pattern blocks that are available inside the DPL Atelier, these are also available, I believe, on the free pattern cutting basics course, so you can play around with pattern cutting techniques with very minimal waste. Here we have my front bodice, and here we have a sleeve. Now, to walk the pattern here, I would be starting at the base of the sleeve, so this 1 notch, and again, watch my last video if you're confused between 1 and 2 notches. 2 notches mark the back of a garment, 2 notches on the sleeve, 1 notch marks the front of a garment. So I know when I've just started to walk this, that this aligns to the front of the garment. Now when I do this, I'm going to start to pivot it, and it's important that you walk your pattern without seam allowance, and it pivots up to the first notch. And then as we pivot around from the notch to the top, you can see I've marked this here. There's actually a fair bit of ease in the sleeve head. And again, if I walk the pattern on this quarter scale block, it pivots to the notches. And then if I continue to pivot this around, making sure that you keep it in place as you're doing it, you can see that again I've marked by here, this is where it meets the shoulder seam. Now this means we've got about, well, on a quarter scale pattern it's not going to be 5 centimeters, but on a normal full size pattern this could be like anywhere between 2-5 centimeters of ease, even more if you've got a sleeve head that has a lot of volume in that needs to be gathered. And so it's a case of just, if you're trying to make sleeve amendments and you've not drafted the pattern yourself, you can establish how much ease is in there. You can lower the sleeve head accordingly. So this is the sleeve without any ease in it, lowered back down. It's the wrong way around because the 2 notches are at the back. So this is the sleeve without the ease in it. So I've lowered the sleeve head down, and now this should walk the full length of these 2 garments, these 2 pattern pieces, front and back bodice. And again, this is when your masking tape can come in useful. And what I'm doing here, even though it's on quarter scale, can absolutely be applied to a full scale block. So I'm just gonna masking tape those together so that, again, they're seamless. And this is what I mean, where they meet here, this may have been squared off so that we have this smooth, flush continuation of the line around the armhole. But now that I've stuck these together, I'm going to walk my pattern, and just to show you, walking it with the sleeve head ease in it, pivoting that around, it's getting caught, and I'm going to pivot that around, and you can see that there's going to be overhang here. So if I just continue that walk, there is much excess and it doesn't align to my notches. My notches have shifted down and we have this much excess on the end. Whereas if I now take the ease out, because I've walked my pattern and understood that there is a big gap between here, which is the amount of ease in my sleeve head, I can now walk my pattern, pivoting it around the edge. My notches line up there, and it might be a bit fiddly at first. It'll definitely be easier on a full scale pattern, let me assure you with that. And it's even easier again if you are digitizing. So if you just hold down on the point where you're pivoting, and then see this lines up nice and flush to the end. So this is without ease. Now you would usually have ease in a sleeve head because you need to account for the shape of the arm and the movement of the body. But I hope that that helps you in terms of walking your pattern. If you feel like one pattern piece is too long, you need to make amendments. Same with the shoulder seam. Walk the shoulder seam here. Make a note that this is closing the dart, and then continue to walk it there. And you can see that that aligns as well. So walking your pattern is a really, really, really vital step. And let's finally do it with the outer leg of these trouser pieces. You'd end up walking these. And so let's start at the top. And you would just rotate and pivot it together. Notice how the hip line aligns, the crotch line aligns, the knee line aligns. Ooh, that's hard to say. And then pivot it to the bottom. So what I'm doing is I'm just cross-referencing all of my lengths there on my pattern. So understanding how to walk your pattern by pivoting it along the appropriate edges together. Really, really important technique to learn and understand. And again, make sure you are doing that without seam allowance. So always, always, always walk your pattern along your stitching line. Hand in hand with walking your pattern might be truing your pattern. Now, by truing your pattern, what we mean is we are just smoothing everything off. We're cross-referencing, just like walking your pattern, that things are in alignment, the side seams match, the shoulder seams match in length. But say I wanted to make this a bit narrow at the waist. I'm going to bring this in at the waist for purpose of the demonstration. And you would bring it in like this. I would draw a line there, and then I can just draw this back out to the hip line. Notice how that is very unnatural if you think about following the contours of the human body. And so truing your pattern, as well as cross-referencing measurements and making sure that everything is in alignment and correct, also means smoothing out these lines. So what I would want to do with my pattern masters, I just want to gently introduce a softer curve there, and they're very minimal changes, but you want to make sure that this is absolutely following the curve of the body. And so if I zoomed in on this, you can see how small that change was. This is a matter of millimeters, but it's just given a much smoother line to that waist there. And again, at the bottom by the hip, instead of just jutting it back out, what I would do is I would square up from my hip line. And it doesn't have to be a continuous line all the way up. It can be 1/2 centimetre. I'd square up from my hip line and I would true this out. So it's just a bit more of an organic fluid shape. And then you can rub these out just for added clarity. And you can true out your pattern again on most areas of the garment as well. It's not just the side seam. You could true out your armhole, true out your shoulder seam, making sure that when you close this dart and align it to the back shoulder seam, everything's in alignment. If it's too long or it's too short, you may want to deduct 1/2 centimetre from the neckline to align it. But just give thought, if you are deducting length, say we are going to amend the shoulder, if you end up deducting length from the armhole, this will have a direct effect on your sleeve pattern. So if the shoulder's too long, it might be a case of deducting from the neckline instead and just trying to play around with that domino effect that pattern drafting and amendments can have on other areas and elements of your pattern. Next up then, I'm going to show you how to add seam allowance and close your darts appropriately. So you're already going to be able to see from here, from my block, that this has a shape to it. So this kind of comes up and down. Now it's important to consider this when you are drafting. You might end up drafting something that looks like this and just goes straight across at the shoulder seam. But what you want to end up doing is cutting out. And I'm going to fold this dart closed in the same direction I would as though I was constructing it. So it's really important that when we start to manipulate our patterns, we do so in the exact same way we intend to construct it. Otherwise your results are not going to be cohesive when you come to make this in fabric. And so to close the dart, I'm bringing the 2 dart legs together. And again, we've gone over what these are in last week's video. I'm going to stick this down with a bit of masking tape to essentially replicate the fact that these would be stitch closed. And this applies to waistline on a skirt, on a pair of trousers. This is literally any single dart. Now again, the dart further down on this bodice here is an enclosed dart. It's got 2 points, it's contained within the garment and the bodice. This dart and the dart legs go towards the outer edge of the garment. So it is when I'm referring to these types of darts that you would absolutely be closing your dart. I'm then going to take my tracing wheel and I'm going to trace over that closed dart. And when you then come to unfold this, what you will notice is it has made that original shape. So it's a case of accounting for this extra volume in the dart. And so once you have traced over it, you're going to notice that when you close your dart, it creates this shape, and you need to account for that added volume of fabric with your dart. So another really important thing to do when you are drafting your own patterns before you add seam allowance is to close any darts and retrace the correct dart shape. So once you are at this stage and you've trued your pattern, you've walked your pattern, you've cross-referenced that this matches the back bodice and there's no discrepancies in length, you've closed your darts, you've made sure that you've trued everything is the right length, you've added in your notches, so you would notch your armhole, you would notch your waistline, you would notch your hemline, you would have markings for your dart placement and the end of your dart here. This is your bust point. You can then add your seam allowance. Now again, using a pattern master, you can make the seam allowance as wide or as narrow as you like, and it could be as big as 3 centimeters, and using your pattern master to kind of go up or down with that. I have a pattern master video available for you. But adding your seam allowance. Now when you come to do professional patterns, your seam allowance might not be the same all the way around your pattern, okay? And so I'm going to add 1 centimeter around my side seam, and you want to make sure that you are doing so accurately, following your cutting line with your pattern master. I might have 1.5 centimeters around my armhole. Say my armhole is going to be French seamed. Say this seam here is going to have a bias bound finish, but I want to actually French seam my armhole. Then I might be adding a centimeter and a half, to my armhole. Now notice with my pattern master, when I go bigger than 1 centimeter, which is the maximum of this curve here, and this curve here only go up to 1 centimetre. So anytime I want to add seam allowance bigger than 1 centimetre, I have to use the straight lines on the rest of my pattern master that warrant 6 centimetres in total. Notice how I'll be pivoting my pattern master. Just like walking a pattern, where any time the straight line breaks away from the curve of the pattern piece, I'm pivoting it to close that gap. And so if you keep your pencil on the page and just slowly pivot your pattern master, then you can get an accurate curve like that. And you may want to neaten that up because I'll be going back and forth as though it's a sketched line. Neaten that up with your pencil, but that'll give you a nice accurate curve as well. And then I might have as little as 0.5 centimetre around my neckline to reduce bulk. And again, this has 0.5 centimetre and 1 centimetre max, so I can add that on with my pattern master. And so just because your shop bought patterns all include, or mainly include, you know, 1 centimetre seam allowance included, 1.5 centimetre seam allowance included all over, doesn't mean that your home drafted patterns need to follow the same rule of thumb. And in fact, when you do it like this, it can actually be a bit more professional finish because you're aware that this is a narrower seam line to reduce bulk, that this is going to be an enclosed French seam, that this is going to have another high-end finish. And so you have the power as the home pattern drafter and pattern maker in order to apply that. And again, I might just come back and do 1 centimetre for the shoulder seam, following that line of my dart, the shape of my dart once I closed it. And so adding your seam allowance might look like this. Now again, when you come to make changes to your pattern, if you amend it, if you do any fitting amendments, if you are walking or truing your pattern, always do so from the cutting line. This internal line here, this external line is your seam allowance, this internal line is your cutting line. So always, always, always do it. Any amendments up to the stitching line, because this is your wiggle room for error. This is your margin for error here. You can let out your seam allowance, you can add more width. That's another reason some people may want to do a wider seam allowance, especially if you're toiling. My top tip actually would be to do a wider seam allowance. Give yourself 2-3 centimetres, because when you come to fit, you're going to have more fabric to kind of take in, take out, and help you with fitting amendments. And when you come to draft your final pattern, then that might be when you decide to do 1 centimetre, 0.5 centimetre, and all of that. But this here is your wiggle room and your margin for error. So anytime you make fitting amendments, you need to do so within the stitch lines, because this is the exterior of the garment. The seam allowance is not seen from the outside of the garment once it's worn. So another thing just to bear in mind with that. Finally then, I want to show you how to add seam lines. Now this could be anything. This could be something wiggly like this, and again, go through the bust point. You can absolutely just randomly add a seam line in like that. And what I would actually do is notch it because it's curved. So I would notch this, and that's going to help you. And adding in a seam line without affecting the fit is as simple as that. You don't want to do so through the dart. If you're going to add this to manipulate the volume of the dart, you want to do it through the dart point and pivot that dart closed. That's a little bit more of an advanced technique, so by all means come and join the DPL Atelier and I will happily explain that to you. But say you just wanted to add a random little squiggly seam line in. You literally can just draw it on like so, and again, don't forget here, by about 0.5 centimetre, I squared this off. And I squared it off by eye because my horizontal balance line was there, which is already squared off. So I've squared that off just by 0.5 centimetre, so that when we do cut this on the fold, that's going to be flush. That's not suddenly going to come up to a V like I illustrated earlier. All you want to do is cut through along that line, and also notice when I finished that squiggle line, I did so up to the interior line. I didn't go through to my stitching, to my seam allowance. I did so only within the contained area of my garment block. And then you just want to cut through. I've added my notches, which again help me align the pattern. I'm just gonna snip through, and then you literally, with a bit of excess paper, can draw on your seam allowance. So that's the really important thing when you are introducing style lines, is you cannot forget about your seam allowance. Otherwise, when you come to construct it, if you came to construct that and tried stitching that over each other and lapping that over each other, you've just taken out 2 centimeters or more by lapping that up. You need to add the seam allowance in order for you to incorporate this. And so you can see my notches all the way around, like so. And again, you can mark your notches however you wish. So you might want to do little triangles, just so that they look a bit different from the horizontal balance lines, in case that confuses you. You might want to, and if you are doing little triangles, again, I touched upon this last week, but make sure that the point of that triangle is meeting the edge of the notch. So your notches might look like that. And I'm just going to whack on a bit of masking tape, just so that my work doesn't move. And then you might want to, again, determine your construction method. Your seam allowance may vary, but let's say, for the purpose of the argument or the demonstration, who am I arguing with? What argument? That this is just 1 centimetre. And you might see me using the curve on this, but again, you can absolutely just go around like this, whatever way suits you. In fact, look how much quicker that is. And I had a mentor before who actually would only ever add seam allowance this way. He'd never used to use the curve on his pattern master. He always felt like this was the most accurate way. Each to their own. And then join that up like so. And so really just make sure, I'm going to extend my centre front here, that you have added your seam allowance, and you would want to do the exact same on this piece here as well. And then you can sew them together and you'll be able to have the exact same fit, and when you sew them together it'll go like this. That was a terrible click, wasn't it? There we are. Like this, and you'll have your original shape without adjusting the fit. It's still going to fit you like a glove, but you've just introduced a really cool style line. So really basic tips here. Really hope that they have helped you. And any questions, yeah, pop them in the comments, or by all means come and join the DPL Atelier, where I give my members one-on-one bespoke support. So there we are. I hope that you found this video useful, with some practical tips, tricks and techniques to up-level your pattern drafting process. Hopefully it's reduced the overwhelm in certain areas. It's made you feel a little confident to give it a go and give it a try. And then of course, if you want to extend that process, come and join us inside the DPL Atelier. At the time of filming, our doors are actually closed, but you can absolutely get your name on the wait list and be the first to know. And in the meantime, I have a free pattern cutting basics course. I don't know why I've given it away for free, but I have, and now I can't go back on it. It's so high value, it's beginner friendly. You can learn tools and terminology, measurements and markings, and basic manipulation techniques to get you started pattern drafting. So if you have found this video insightful, if you feel like you want to learn more, if you feel like it's not been enough, then I have plenty of other resources for you to dip in and enjoy, as I'm trying very, very hard here at Digital Pattern Library to make fashion accessible for all. So go give that a go, no strings attached, and you'll be able to instantly access the 3 high value workshops included in that. But for now, my friends, I will catch you on the flip side. Wishing you well, stay safe, keep creative, and I'll see you in a video very, very soon.